Welcome back to She Betrayed Her Best Friend, Part 2. If you're just joining us and haven't watched Part 1 yet, pause right here and check the link in the description below. Trust me, you need the full story to understand the betrayal, the heartbreak, and why what's about to unfold is the karma everyone's been waiting for. For those who've been with us since the beginning, you asked for it, you begged for it in the comments, and now here it is. What happened after the wedding? Did Chioma ever heal? Did Adana and Emeka get their karma? Well, grab your popcorn, settle in, and let's dive into the consequences of betrayal and the sweet taste of healing. The apartment had become a tomb, and Chioma was both the corpse and the mourner. For 3 weeks straight, she'd called in sick to work, her voice hoarse from crying and the lies she told her boss about malaria, about food poisoning, about anything that wasn't the truth. That getting out of bed felt like lifting a building, that showering required energy she didn't possess, that the simple act of existing in a space where she'd laughed with her betrayers felt like slow suffocation. The couch still held the indent where Adana used to sleep, the kitchen still smelled faintly of her egusi soup, and every corner held a memory that now felt like a knife. Movie nights that were probably cover for stolen glances, dinner conversations where they'd plotted her destruction while she smiled obliviously, 7 years of friendship that turned out to be 7 years of her sleeping next to a viper. Her phone buzzed constantly with her mother's calls, each one more frantic than the last. Chioma, pick up this phone. Chioma, talk to me. Chioma, I'm getting on a bus right now if you don't answer. But answering required explaining, and explaining required reliving it. And reliving it required a strength she'd run out of the moment Emeka said, "He's giving me what you wouldn't." Her mother showed up on a Tuesday morning, didn't bother knocking, used the spare key Chioma had given her years ago for emergencies, and what she found was exactly that, an emergency. Chioma was still in bed at 11 a.m., wearing the same oversized t-shirt she'd been in for 4 days, surrounded by empty water bottles and tissue boxes, her silky hair that she'd once adorned with gold jewelry, now matted and unwashed, her room dark despite the Lagos sun blazing outside. Chioma, what is this?" Her mother's voice cut through the fog like a machete through bush, and before Chioma could protest, curtains were being yanked open, windows flung wide, and her mother was pulling her physically out of bed with the kind of strength that only Nigerian mothers possessed when their children were in danger. "You think I carried you for 9 months, pushed you out screaming, raised you through university, just for you to waste away over a man and a snake that called herself your friend? Today you will get up, today you will shower, and tomorrow we are going to see someone who will help you get your mind right." The words were harsh, but the hands were gentle, stroking Chioma's matted hair, wiping tears that Chioma didn't even realize were falling, and for the first time in weeks, Chioma let herself be held like the child she felt like, sobbing into her mother's shoulder while her mother rocked her and whispered prayers in Igbo, calling down fire on Adana's head and restoration on Chioma's spirit. The therapist's office felt like surrender at first, like admitting she was broken beyond her own ability to fix, and Chioma had resisted every step of the way. "I don't need therapy, I just need time. Therapy is for Igbo people with Igbo problems. I'm fine, Mama, really." But her mother had that look, the one that said this wasn't a discussion, and so Chioma found herself sitting in a small office in Lekki, facing a woman named Dr. Amaka, who had kind eyes and didn't immediately ask her to talk about her feelings, which Chioma appreciated. Instead, Dr. Amaka asked about her apartment, about her daily routine, about the physical space she occupied, and when she described it, the couch, the kitchen, the bedroom, all haunted, Dr. Amaka leaned forward and said something that changed everything. "You can't heal in the same environment where you are broken. That apartment isn't your home anymore. It's a crime scene, and you are trying to sleep at the scene of your own murder." The word hit like a thunderclap, and suddenly Chioma could see it clearly. Every wall held a ghost. Every piece of furniture was evidence of her naivety, and staying there wasn't healing, it was self-harm. Within 2 weeks, she was apartment hunting, scrolling through listings with a mix of hope and grief, and when she finally found a small one-bedroom in Ikeja, nothing fancy but clean and hers and empty of history, she signed the lease with shaking hands. Moving day was brutal, Packing up meant confronting every photo of the three of them, every gift Emeka had given her, every trace of Adana's presence. And Chioma stood in the middle of the empty living room with a trash bag in one hand and a lighter in the other, feeding their smiling faces to the flames in the parking lot, while her mother stood guard, making sure she actually went through with it. The new apartment was smaller, the furniture was minimal, but when Chioma locked the door behind her that first night and looked around at space that held no memories of betrayal, she slept for 8 hours straight for the first time in 2 months and woke up feeling something she'd forgotten existed: the possibility of a future. Adana stood in the bridal boutique, surrounded by white lace and tulle, her mother and Emeka's mother fussing over her like she was a prize they'd won in a competition. And all she could think about was the message that had appeared on her phone 3 days ago from a number she didn't recognize. Don't marry him. He's not who you think he is. She'd shown it to Emeka immediately, her hands trembling as she held up the phone, expecting him to be concerned, to investigate, to take it seriously. Instead, he'd barely glanced at it before kissing her forehead and saying, "Baby, it's just jealous people. You know how Nigerians are. They can't stand to see others happy. It's probably one of my exes, or maybe even..." He'd paused, his face carefully neutral. "Maybe Chi, trying to mess with your head. Block the number and forget about it." The explanation made sense, almost too much sense, and Adana had nodded, blocked the number, and tried to push it out of her mind. But at night, when Emeka was snoring beside her and her hand rested on her growing belly, the message would replay in her mind like a song she couldn't unhear, and she'd wonder what the sender knew that she didn't, what secrets were hiding behind Emeka's generous smile and his family's enthusiastic acceptance of her. The second message came a week later, from a different number, and this time it was more specific, more terrifying. "Ask him about the other women. Save yourself while you still can. The wedding is a mistake." Emeka's blood ran cold as she read it, her morning sickness suddenly having nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with dread. This time, she didn't show Emeka right away. Instead, she scrolled through his phone while he was in the shower, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it over the running water, looking for evidence of what the messages claimed. She found nothing. No suspicious texts, no dating apps, no incriminating photos, and the relief was so overwhelming she almost cried. When she finally showed him the second message over dinner, Emeka's reaction was sharper, angrier. "This is harassment. This is someone trying to destroy our happiness. Adana, listen to me. I love you. I chose you. I'm marrying you. These messages are lies designed to make you doubt us." He'd reached across the table, taking both her hands in his eyes intense and sincere. "Don't let whoever this is win. We've come too far. We have a baby on the way. We have a future. Block this number too. And if another one comes, don't even read it. Promise me." And Adana, desperate to believe, desperate for the life she'd destroyed a friendship to obtain to be real, had promised. She'd blocked the second number, deleted both messages, and threw herself into wedding planning with renewed vigor, as if activity could drown out the small voice in her head that whispered the messages might be true. The wedding was everything she'd ever dreamed of and nothing she'd ever wanted, if that made sense. Which it didn't, but then again, nothing about her life made sense anymore. 300 guests packed into a hotel ballroom in Ikeja. Her dress cost more than her father made in 6 months. Emeka's family paid for it, of course. Another way to own her, though she didn't realize that yet. And the photographer captured every moment of what looked like joy, but felt increasingly like performance. Her own mother cried during the vows, but Adana noticed her father's face was tight, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, like he was watching his daughter make a terrible mistake, but had been overruled by the excitement of marrying into a good family. Emeka looked handsome in his navy blue agbada,
His mother looked triumphant in her elaborate gele, and Adana looked beautiful in white, which felt like the biggest lie of all considering how this marriage started, in betrayal, in secrecy, in the ruins of someone else's relationship. As they said their vows, Adana found herself scanning the crowd, half expecting to see Chioma standing in the back with those anonymous messages written on her face, ready to object when the priest asked if anyone had reason these two should not be wed. But Chioma wasn't there, of course. She'd blocked her everywhere, had not responded to a single attempt at contact, had vanished so completely, it was like their 7 years of friendship had never existed. And as Emeka slipped the ring on her finger and the crowd erupted in cheers, Adana smiled for the photos and wondered why victory felt so much like defeat.
The first time Adana found evidence of another woman, she was 5 months pregnant and looking for Emeka's phone charger in his car. What she found instead was a receipt from a hotel in Lekki, not just any hotel, but the kind with hourly rates that everyone knew weren't for business meetings, dated 3 days ago, the same day he'd claimed to be in a marathon client meeting that ran until midnight. Her hands shook as she held the crumpled paper, her pregnant belly pressed against the car door, her mind racing through explanations that might make this innocent. Maybe it was an old receipt, maybe he'd picked up a colleague, maybe. But then she checked the glove compartment and found 2 more. Different hotels, different dates, all recent, all during times when he'd said he was working late or traveling for business. When she confronted him that evening, belly full of their child and hands full of evidence, Emeka didn't even have the decency to look caught. Instead, he looked annoyed, like she was a child interrupting adult business. Adana, those are client meetings. Sometimes we need privacy to discuss sensitive business matters. What, you think I'm running around with women while my wife is pregnant? You're being paranoid. The gaslighting was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment she actually doubted what her own eyes had seen, what her gut was screaming. But she pressed on. Emeka, these are hotels, not conference rooms, not restaurants, hotels. And that's when his face changed, hardened into something she'd never seen before, something that reminded her terrifyingly of the night he told Chioma he was leaving her. Cold calculation. You know what your problem is, Adana? You are insecure. This is exactly why my mother said you'd need to learn to trust. Chio never questioned me like this. And there it was, Chioma's name, wielded like a weapon, a reminder that she was the replacement, the second choice, the one who should be grateful. Things escalated when Adana found the messages. Not hidden messages. Emeka wasn't even trying to hide them anymore. Just regular texts from numbers saved as Nike, Blessing, Titi, all with the kind of familiarity that made her stomach turn. Last night was amazing. When can I see you again? I miss you already. Kisses. She'd scrolled through them with tears streaming down her face, her baby kicking inside her as if protesting the stress. And when she showed Emeka's mother, because surely a mother would take her side, would be horrified that her son was cheating on his pregnant wife, the older woman had looked at the phone, looked at Adana, and said something that made her blood freeze. Adana, my dear, men will be men. Your job is to keep him happy at home so he doesn't need to look elsewhere. Have you been fulfilling your wifely duties? Are you keeping yourself attractive despite the pregnancy? Are you nagging him too much? The victim blaming was so casual, so matter of fact, that Adana actually laughed, a bitter, broken sound that made Emeka's mother frown. I'm serious, Adana. If you want to keep your marriage, you need to be smart about these things. Stop going through his phone, stop questioning him, and focus on being the kind of wife a man wants to come home to. That's what I did with Emeka's father, and we've been married for 35 years. The revelation hung in the air like poison. Emeka hadn't learned his behavior from nowhere. He'd learned it from watching his father disrespect his mother while she smiled and called it wisdom. And suddenly, Adana understood why they'd preferred her over Chioma.
Chioma would have burnt the house down before accepting this. Chioma would have demanded respect, would have left, would have refused to shrink herself for a man's comfort. But Adana, grateful Adana, chosen Adana, pregnant and dependent and increasingly isolated Adana was exactly what they wanted, controllable. The baby arrived on a Tuesday, a beautiful girl they named Chidera, and Emeka showed up to the hospital 3 hours after she was born, smelling of perfume that wasn't Adana's and offering apologies about traffic that couldn't possibly have lasted 3 hours. His mother had been there for the birth, coaching Adana through contractions while criticizing her breathing technique, and when the baby finally came, the older woman had scooped her up like a trophy, already planning the naming ceremony without consulting Adana about any detail. The date, the venue, the guest list, even the baby's traditional name. "We'll call her Oluchi," Emeka's mother announced, and when Adana weakly protested that they'd agreed on Chidera, the woman had waved her hand dismissively. "Chidera is fine for every day, but her Igbo name is Oluchi. It's decided." And just like that, Adana learned what the rest of her life would be. Decisions made without her input, her daughter raised according to someone else's rules, her body recovered from birth only to be criticized for not snapping back fast enough, her sleep-deprived nights punctuated by Emeka coming home late or not at all, and her voice growing smaller and smaller until she wondered if she'd ever had one to begin with. At 3 a.m., when the baby was finally asleep, and Emeka was God knows where, and the house was quiet except for the sound of her own crying, Adana would pull out her phone and do the things she'd sworn she wouldn't. She'd look at Chioma's Instagram, and there she was, glowing in photos from what looked like a work event, smiling in a selfie with her mother, posting motivational quotes about healing and new beginnings, looking free in a way that made her chest ache with something deeper than regret. Recognition that she traded everything for nothing, that she destroyed a friendship and stolen a man only to discover that the prize was actually a prison, and that the woman she'd betrayed was out there somewhere, living the life Adana had foolishly thrown away. 10 months after moving into her new apartment, Chioma got a promotion she actually deserved, not one handed to her by a man trying to control her life through generosity. Her boss at the marketing firm, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Oladele, who didn't tolerate nonsense, called her into the office on a Friday afternoon, and Chioma's first thought was that she was being fired for all those weeks she'd missed during her breakdown. Instead, Mrs. Oladele slid a folder across the desk and said, "Senior Account Manager, 20% raise. You've earned it. The clients love you. Your campaigns are bringing in results. And frankly, I've watched you come back from whatever broke you last year stronger than most people I know. That's the kind of resilience I want leading my team." Chioma had stared at the offer letter, her eyes blurring with tears that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with being seen, actually seen for her work, rather than her relationship status or her willingness to shrink herself. Dr. Amaka had told her that healing wasn't linear, that some days she'd feel like she was back at square one. But this felt like proof that she was actually moving forward, that the woman who'd let her best friend live in her house and tag along on every date was being replaced by someone who understood that boundaries weren't walls, they were bridges to healthier connections. She'd called her mother from the office bathroom, crying happy tears for the first time in almost a year, and her mother had screamed so loud people probably heard it in Cotonou. I told you God was going to restore everything the locust ate. My daughter, this is just the beginning." She met Tunde on a Sunday brunch that her colleague Ngozi had practically dragged her to. "Chi, you can't hide in your apartment forever. And before you say you are not hiding, yes you are. I can see your Instagram story and it's been the same 4 walls for months." The restaurant was one of those trendy spots in Victoria Island where people went to be seen. And Chioma had almost turned back 3 times before Ngozi physically pulled her through the door. Tunde was Ngozi's cousin in Lagos for a month on business from Abuja, and when Ngozi introduced them, Chioma's first thought was that he looked kind, not handsome in that aggressive way Emeka had been, where his looks were a weapon he knew how to use, but kind in his eyes, in his smile, in the way he pulled out her chair without making a production of it. They talked about work, about Lagos traffic, about the best jollof rice spots. He was wrong about yellow chili being better than buka, but she let it slide. And halfway through brunch, when Ngozi got up to take a call, he'd said something that made Chioma's guard slam up like a steel door. "So, Ngozi mentioned you're single. I hope that's not weird," that she told me. "I'm single too, and honestly, meeting someone organically in Lagos is harder than finding good roads." Chioma had frozen, her fork halfway to her mouth, because the last thing she needed was another man, another complication, another opportunity to lose herself. But then, Tunde had noticed her expression and immediately backtracked. "Sorry, that was too forward. I just thought we could be friends. You seem cool, and I don't know many people in Lagos anymore since I moved to Abuja. No pressure." And maybe it was the therapy, or maybe it was the fact that he'd actually noticed her discomfort and adjusted instead of pushing through it. But Chioma had relaxed slightly and said, "Friends is good. Friends I can do." They started as genuinely just friends. Coffee meetups where they complained about work, movie night where she'd invite Ugozi to so it wasn't a date, WhatsApp conversations that were funny without being flirty. Tunde never pushed, never assumed, never did that thing men do where they perform friendship while waiting for it to turn into something else. He was just present, easy, safe. And slowly, over 3 months of friendship, Chiona found herself actually wanting more, actually imagining what it might be like to try again with someone who seemed fundamentally different from Emeka. When she finally agreed to an actual date, just the two of them, intentionally romantic, she'd laid out her boundaries before they even ordered appetizers, her heart pounding because she expected him to laugh or get defensive or do what Emeka would have done, which was agree and then slowly erode them. "Tunde, I need you to know some things up front. My friends are my friends. They'll meet you, but I need friend time that's separate from couple time. I'm not doing the thing where my entire social life revolves around my relationship. Girls' trips are girls' trips. I'm not bringing you to every event. And if you have a problem with any of that, it's better we know now." She'd braced herself for pushback, but Tunde had just nodded thoughtfully and said, "That actually sounds incredibly healthy. My ex used to get mad when I wanted to hang out with my boys, said it meant I didn't want to spend time with her. It was exhausting. So yeah, I'm completely on board with both of us having separate lives that we choose to share." And just like that, something in Chioma's chest that had been clenched tight for over a year finally started to relax. 6 months into dating Tunde, Chioma posted a photo on Instagram. Nothing dramatic, just her at a work event wearing the coral dress she'd bought for herself with her first bonus from the promotion, her silky hair adorned with the gold jewelry she'd reclaimed from the woman who'd almost let betrayal steal her shine, smiling genuinely at whoever was behind the camera. The caption was simple: "Growth looks good on me." The comments flooded in. Her real friends, her colleagues, her mother, who still didn't quite understand Instagram but had learned to comment heart emojis. And buried in the middle, hidden among the love, was a new account she didn't recognize, created just days ago with no posts and no followers. "You look happy. I'm glad. I'm sorry. A." Chioma stared at that comment for a full 5 minutes, her thumb hovering over the delete button. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She didn't delete it, didn't respond, just left it there like a ghost haunting the comment section. Proof that Adana was watching, was suffering, was finally understanding what she'd lost. Dr. Amaka had told her that healing wasn't linear, that some days she'd feel like she was back at square one. But this felt like proof that she was actually moving forward, that the woman who'd let her best friend live in her house and tag along on every date was being replaced by someone who understood that boundaries weren't walls, they were bridges to healthier connections. Well, before the story comes to an end, do tell me which part of the world you are watching from. And if you are watching from TikTok, the video is already posted on YouTube. Don't forget to share the story. Enjoy. Adana's life had become a loop of the same nightmare playing on repeat. Wake up to a crying baby, reach for a husband who wasn't there, change diapers while her mother-in-law criticized her technique from the doorway, prepare breakfast that Emeka wouldn't eat because he'd already eaten wherever he'd spent the night, and scroll through Chioma's social media like picking at a wound that refused to heal. The photos were worse than any punishment. Chioma at what looked like a fancy restaurant with a man whose face Adana couldn't quite see, but whose body language screamed respect. He wasn't draped all over her, wasn't performing ownership, just sitting across from her like she was someone worth listening to. Chioma at a work conference with a lanyard that said Senior Account Manager and a smile that looked nothing like the forced ones from their university days. Chioma with her mother, both of them laughing at something off camera, the kind of genuine joy that Adana hadn't felt since before she'd made the worst decision of her life. Each photo was a knife, and Adana kept stabbing herself with them. Couldn't stop, because seeing Chioma happy was the only proof that someone had escaped the trap Adana was now locked inside. She tried calling from different numbers, her cousin's phone, her office line, even a brand new SIM card she bought specifically for this purpose. But every number got blocked within hours, like Chioma had developed a sixth sense for recognizing her desperation across digital distances. The evidence of Emeka's other women stopped being something he bothered to hide and started being something he flaunted, like her knowing was part of the punishment for having the audacity to question him. She'd find long weaves that weren't hers in the bathroom, lipstick shades she'd never worn on his collar, and once, she'd found a pair of women's underwear in their bed, not even hidden under the sheets, but right there on his pillow like a calling card. When she'd confronted him, holding the evidence in shaking hands, while baby Chidera screamed from the nursery, Emeka had looked at her with something close to contempt and said words that would replay in her nightmares. You know what your problem is, Adana. You forgot how you got here. You think because you're my wife now, you have rights, you have standards, you stole me from Chi, you slept with your best friend's man, you destroyed a 7-year friendship for this life, and now you want to complain about the terms and conditions? The cruelty was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that Adana had actually stumbled backward like she'd been physically hit. But you chose me. You said you loved me. You left her for me. Emeka had laughed then, actually laughed, and the sound was worse than anything that had come before. I left her because she wouldn't give me a child when I wanted one. You gave me what I wanted when I wanted it. That's not love, Adana. That's convenience. And now that I have my child, what exactly do you think you're bringing to this marriage besides complaints? He'd walked out after that, didn't come home for 3 days, and when he finally returned, it was only to drop off money for the baby and grab a change of clothes. His family was no better. In fact, they were worse, because at least Emeka's cruelty was honest, but theirs came wrapped in concern and tradition, and this is how marriage works. Adana's mother-in-law had practically moved in after the baby was born, ostensibly to help, but actually to control every single aspect of Adana's life. How she fed the baby, breast milk only, formula is for lazy mothers. How she dressed, you need to look presentable even at home in case Emeka brings guests. How she spent money, why do you need new clothes when you have a baby to care for? Even how she grieved the loss of her friendship and her autonomy. You know, her mother-in-law said one afternoon, while Adana was trying to get the baby down for a nap, Emeka's father had his ways too. All men do, but I was smart and I made myself indispensable. I kept my mouth shut, kept my figure, kept my home perfect. That's why we're still married. You young girls want to be equals with men, want to have opinions and boundaries, and then you wonder why your marriages are falling apart. Adana wanted to scream that her marriage was falling apart because her husband was a serial cheater and her mother was an enabler, but she'd learned that screaming in this family was pointless. They just use it as evidence of her instability, her insuitability, her failure to adapt to what they called real marriage. The isolation was the worst part, worse even than the cheating, worse than the control, because at least those were external attacks. The isolation was what she'd done to herself. She had no friends. She'd betrayed the only real friend she'd ever had and lost all the peripheral ones in the process because nobody wanted to be friends with the girl who slept with her best friend's boyfriend, who got pregnant and stole someone's man. Her family was disappointed in her, could barely look at her during visits because they knew how this marriage had started and were too ashamed to admit they encouraged it because Emeka had money. She couldn't talk to anyone about what she was going through because admitting her marriage was a disaster meant admitting she'd destroyed Chioma's relationship for nothing, that every warning she'd ignored, from those anonymous messages to her own gut to her father's tight smile at the wedding, had been right. So she existed in a prison of her own making, and the only window to the outside world was Chioma's Instagram, where she could see the life she could have had if she'd just been a real friend, if she just had integrity, if she just said no that night instead of yes. At 2 a.m., with Chidera finally asleep and Emeka's side of the bed cold and empty, and her mother-in-law snoring in the guest room, Adana would type out messages she'd never send. Chi, I'm so sorry. Chi, you were right about everything. Chi, please forgive me. Chi, I miss you. Chi, help me. But she never sent them, because what could Chioma possibly say except I told you so, or worse, nothing at all? Which was exactly what Adana deserved, the deafening silence of consequences finally catching up.
The grocery store in Lekki was the last place Adana expected her carefully constructed avoidance of Chioma to finally collapse. But life had a cruel sense of timing. She was in the produce section, baby Chidera strapped to her chest in a carrier, trying to remember if they needed tomatoes or if her mother-in-law had already bought some. Keeping track of the household was impossible when someone else controlled everything. When she heard a laugh that made her freeze mid-reach for a basket of peppers. That laugh, she'd know it anywhere, had heard it 1,000 times over 7 years, had missed it every single day for the past year and a half. She turned slowly, like someone in a horror movie who knows the monster is behind them but can't help looking anyway. And there she was, Chioma, radiant in a way that made Adana's chest physically ache, wearing a yellow sundress that showed off her curves, her long silky hair adorned with delicate gold clips that caught the supermarket's fluorescent lights and somehow made them look flattering. Her big white hips swaying slightly as she examined avocados with a tall, handsome man beside her who was saying something that made her laugh again. The man, and Adana felt sick recognizing this, was standing at a respectful distance, close enough to be together, but far enough to be two separate people, not the codependent, boundaryless proximity that had defined Chioma's relationship with Emeka, with her. And Chioma looked happy, genuinely happy, not performing for Instagram happy, but the kind of deep contentment that showed in relaxed shoulders and easy smiles and the absence of that tension Adana remembered from their last year living together, when Chioma was always trying to make everyone comfortable and ending up uncomfortable herself. Adana should have left, should have abandoned her basket and fled to another section, another store, another life. But her feet moved forward like they belonged to someone else, pulled by a desperation that had been building for 18 months of blocked calls and ignored messages and the crushing weight of consequences. "Chi," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and Chioma turned. And for one terrible, hopeful second, Adana thought she saw something like recognition, maybe even softness flash across Chioma's face before it settled into something far worse than anger. Polite neutrality. The expression you'd give a stranger who'd accidentally bumped your shopping cart. "Adana," Chioma said, her voice carefully flat, and the man beside her, Tunde, Adana would later learn from more Instagram stalking, moved slightly closer, protective but not possessive, and Adana wanted to scream at the perfection of it all, at how Chioma had found exactly what she herself had destroyed. "Chi, please, I've been trying to reach you. I know you blocked me. I know I don't deserve your time, but please, just 5 minutes. I need to apologize. I need you to know." But Chioma held up a hand, gentle but firm, the same gesture she'd probably learnt in therapy or from healthy relationship books or from becoming the kind of woman who didn't let people who'd proven themselves untrustworthy back into her space. "Adana, I don't need your apology. I don't need anything from you, actually." The words were surgical, cutting clean through Adana's prepared speech about guilt and regret and asking for forgiveness. Chioma shifted her basket to her other arm, and Adana noticed the subtle way Tunde took it from her without being asked. Such a small gesture of consideration that it made Adana want to cry, because Emeka hadn't carried anything for her in months, wouldn't even hold his own daughter unless his mother was watching. "I want you to know something, and then I need you to let me move on with my life," Chioma continued, her voice steady, like she'd practiced this, or like Dr. Amaka had helped her prepare for the inevitable moment when their paths would cross. "I don't feel bad about what happened anymore. Actually,
I'm grateful. Adana's breath caught because those were the last words she'd expected. Anger, yes. Coldness, definitely. But gratitude? You are grateful? She whispered, bouncing slightly to keep Chidera from fussing. And Chioma's eyes flickered to the baby, something unreadable crossing her face before she continued. I'm grateful because you spared me. You spared me from a man who would have controlled me, cheated on me, made me small. You spared me from a family that would have suffocated me, criticized me, demanded I lose myself to fit their idea of a proper wife. You spared me from wasting more years on someone who saw me as a possession rather than a partner. Chioma's voice was gentle, almost kind, which somehow made it worse than if she had been screaming. I see your Instagram stories, Adana. I see what your life looks like. And I hope you find peace with your choices. I really do. But I need you to understand. I'm happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way I never was with Emeka. So thank you for doing me a favor I didn't know I needed. Tunde had placed a hand on the small of Chioma's back, not controlling, just supportive, and was clearly ready to leave, to extract his girlfriend from an uncomfortable situation, showing the kind of emotional intelligence that Emeka wouldn't recognize if it slapped him. But Adana couldn't let her go. Not yet. Not when this might be the last chance she'd ever have. I ruined everything, she said, tears now flowing freely, not caring that other shoppers were starting to stare, that Chidera was beginning to whimper, that she looked exactly like what she was, desperate and broken. I destroyed our friendship. I destroyed your relationship. And for what? For a man who treats me like I'm nothing? For a family that controls every breath I take? For a life that looks perfect on Instagram but feels like a prison? She was sobbing now, ugly crying in the produce section, and some distant part of her brain recognized how pathetic this was, how she'd become the villain in her own story and was now begging the heroine for forgiveness that shouldn't be granted. I miss you, Chi. I miss my friend. I miss the person I was before I did this. Please, is there any way? But Chioma was already shaking her head, backing away, and her face held something that looked almost like pity, which was somehow more devastating than if she had been hatred. There's no way back, Adana. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. I forgive you. I had to, for my own peace. But forgiving you doesn't mean trusting you. It doesn't mean friendship. It just means I'm no longer carrying the weight of what you did. And with that, Chioma turned to Tunde, said something quiet that made him nod, and they walked away, leaving Adana standing alone in the vegetable aisle, her baby crying now, her vision blurred with tears, watching the woman she had betrayed walk towards a future that Adana foolishly traded away for a man who never really was a prize after all. The final image of their parallel lives could have been a photograph. Chioma 6 months later, sitting at an upscale restaurant in Victoria Island, her hand intertwined with Tunde across a table that held 2 plates of perfectly prepared suya and a bottle of wine they were sharing. Her friends, Ngozi, and 2 others at a nearby table having their own dinner, separate but visible. The healthy boundaries she had insisted on in practice, everyone respecting the space between togetherness and independence. She was laughing at something Tunde said, her head thrown back, her gold jewelry catching the candlelight. And when he looked at her, it was with the kind of attention that said, you are the only person in this room, without the possessiveness that said, you are the only person you are allowed to see. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. How's the date? When do I get grandchildren? And she rolled her eyes affectionately, typed back, Mama, relax, we're taking our time. Because that's what healing had taught her. That rushing led to breaking, that slow and steady built foundations that lasted. Meanwhile, across Lagos, in a house in Ikeja that should have felt like a palace, but felt like a cage, Adana sat on her couch at 11 p.m., baby finally asleep after 2 hours of crying, mother-in-law finally in her own room after 2 hours of criticizing, and Emeka still not home after texting at 6 p.m. that he'll be late, which meant he wouldn't be home at all, which meant he was with whoever Nike or Blessing or Titi was that week. Her phone was open to Chioma's Instagram. She'd created her 7th burner account after the 6th got blocked, and she was staring at a post from earlier that evening. Chioma and Tunde at what looked like a movie premiere, both dressed beautifully, both glowing with the kind of happiness that Adana had convinced herself didn't exist outside of fairy tales. The caption read, choosing peace over chaos, healing over history, and people who choose me back, white. Her thumb hovered over the like button. She couldn't like it without revealing her new fake account. And tears rolled down her phone screen as Emeka's key turned in the lock at 2 a.m., the smell of someone else's perfume preceding him into the house. Another night in the prison she'd built with betrayal. Chioma was in her apartment that same night, the small one-bedroom in Ikeja that held no ghosts, scrolling through her phone before bed, and she came across her own Instagram post, saw the comments flooding in with heart emojis and "you deserve it, queen," and "this is what healing looks like." And among them, buried, she noticed several accounts that had viewed her story but never liked or commented, all created within the past few months, all with 0 followers, all obviously Adana's desperate attempts to stay connected to a life she'd destroyed. For a moment, just one moment, Chioma felt something like sadness, not for herself, but for the girl Adana used to be before greed and poor choices had turned her into someone unrecognizable. Then she did something she'd been practicing in therapy. She acknowledged the feeling, sat with it for exactly 60 seconds, and then let it go, like releasing a balloon into the sky and watching it disappear. She opened her Photos app and scrolled to a folder she'd created months ago labeled "Delete when ready," full of old pictures of her, Emeka, and Adana, the trio that once seemed inseparable, the friendship that once felt unbreakable, the naivete that almost cost her everything. One by one, she moved them to the trash, watched them disappear into the digital void, and when the folder was empty, she felt lighter, freer, like she'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks and had finally figured out she could just put it down. The last photo she deleted was from their graduation, both of them in their gowns, arms around each other, smiling at a future they thought they'd navigate together. And as it vanished from her phone, Chioma whispered to her younger self, "Thank you for surviving. Thank you for living. Thank you for learning that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that could have happened." Then she plugged in her phone, turned off the light, and fell asleep in her ghost-free apartment, dreaming of a future that belonged entirely to her. While across Lagos, in a much bigger house that felt infinitely smaller, Adana lay awake, staring at the ceiling, living the consequences of winning a prize that was never worth the cost. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were Chioma's friend and witnessed this whole story unfold, what advice would you give her? Should she have forgiven Adana? Could their friendship ever be repaired? Or are some betrayals truly unforgivable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Comment Team Chioma if you think she handled this perfectly, or Adana deserved better if you think there's more to her story. Let's debate.